Welcome to Libyth. I'm glad you're here. We have spent time inside the structure of the Pillow Book and inside its cast of characters, and now I want to ask the hardest question. What is this book actually about? And I want to ask it in a way that respects the difficulty of the question, because the obvious answer. It is about daily life in the Heian court. It is about what a particular educated woman noticed and preferred and found beautiful or hateful, is true but incomplete. There is a literal layer to the Pillow Book, and there is a figurative layer. And the figurative layer is the one that explains why the book is still being read 1,000 years after it was written. Let me start with the literal, because the literal is genuinely important and genuinely interesting, and we have not fully dwelt on it yet. The Pillow Book is one of the most detailed documents we have of daily life in the Heian court. The robes, the incense, the paper, the layout of the palace buildings, the ceremonies, the poetry exchanges, the way people moved through space, who preceded whom, who sat where, what was said on what occasion. For historians of the Heian period, the text is invaluable precisely because it records with such specificity and such lack of self-consciousness. Shōnagon is not writing for posterity, not composing a historical record, just writing what she saw, the textures of a world that other documents describe only in formal, ceremonial terms. The formal documents tell us what was supposed to happen. The Pillow Book tells us what it felt like when it happened, and what happened in the spaces between the official moments. But the literal layer is not where the book's power lies, or not primarily. The literal layer, the robes, the ceremonies, the court gossip, would not make this book readable today if that were all there was. What makes it readable? What makes it feel so alive? What makes it feel like someone speaking to you now rather than a document from the distant past is the figurative layer. And the figurative layer is built around several interlocking propositions. The first is that the self is an aesthetic project. Shonagon constructs herself, in this book, entirely through what she notices and prefers and judges. She never gives us biography. She never gives us developmental narrative, the story of how she came to be the person she is. She gives us a continuous performance of being a particular kind of person, someone who notices the quality of a particular dawn, who cares about the difference between the right and wrong shade of robe for a particular ceremony, who can produce the correct classical illusion at the right moment, who finds certain kinds of human behavior aesthetically and morally intolerable. The self is not given or inherited or discovered. It is assembled moment by moment, preference by preference, judgment by judgment. You are what you notice. You are what you refuse. You are the accumulated weight of your aesthetic choices. This is a philosophical proposition, and it is not an obvious one. Most systems of selfhood that were available to a 10th century Japanese aristocrat were either Buddhist, in which the self is ultimately illusory, a temporary constellation of causes and conditions on its way to dissolution, or Confucian, in which the self is constituted by its social relationships and its performance of the duties those relationships impose. Shōnagon's model of selfhood is neither of these, or it is both of them transformed into something new by her particular genius. She takes the Buddhist attention to moment-by-moment experience and turns it toward the aesthetic rather than the transcendent. She takes the Confucian insistence on the importance of correct performance and extends it from the ethical domain to the aesthetic one. The result is a model of selfhood in which who you are is legible in what you find beautiful, in which the question, What kind of person are you? Is answered not by reference to your duties or your metaphysics, but by the list of things that make your heart beat faster. The second proposition is that beauty is a moral category. This is perhaps the most important and most difficult idea in the book, and it requires a little unpacking. When Shonagon writes about a robes combination that is wrong for the season, or a person whose behavior is graceless and inappropriate, or a poem that misquotes its source, she is making what appears to be an aesthetic judgment, a judgment of beauty or its absence. But in the world of the Pillow Book, aesthetic failure and moral failure are not separate. The person who wears the wrong robes has failed to read the situation correctly, has failed to attend to the world around them with sufficient care, has placed their own comfort or indifference above the shared aesthetic world that the court maintains together. This is not just a fashion mistake. It is a failure of attention, a failure of the care that the world requires. It is a failure to take the world seriously in the way that the world deserves to be taken seriously. Ugliness, in Shonagon's moral universe, is not just aesthetically unpleasant. It is a sign of something deeper wrong, a failure of character, of cultivation, of the basic human project of being adequately present to the beauty that is available. This sounds harsh, and it is harsh, and I want to be honest about that. There is something genuinely uncomfortable about a system in which aesthetic competence becomes a moral credential, in which the ability to know the right poem at the right moment becomes evidence of being a good person. The uncomfortable thing is not that Shōnagon holds this view. It is coherent within her cultural framework, but that the cultural framework itself produces a world in which vast numbers of human beings are simply outside consideration, because they lack the education, the leisure, the resources to develop the kind of aesthetic competence the system requires. The servants are invisible in the Pillow Book, not because they are bad people, but because they are aesthetically illegible to a system that only recognizes the refined. This is the moral limit of the book, and it is a real one. But here is what is also true. Within the world the book describes, the proposition that beauty is a moral category is not merely elitist. It also requires a genuine attentiveness to the world. The person who knows the right poem is the person who has paid attention to the tradition, who has cared enough about the cultural inheritance to internalize it, who has taken the time to learn something that required effort. The person who wears the right robes has noticed what the season calls for, has attended to the world around them, has made an effort to participate in the shared aesthetic project that makes the court world possible. The moral weight of these acts is not nothing. The aestheticism of the Pillow Book is, in part, an insistence on effort, on the effort to be present, to notice, to care, to get it right. And getting it right is not just about self-presentation. It is about courtesy, about respect for the world and the people in it, about the basic commitment to treating shared experience with the seriousness it deserves. The third proposition is the one that most directly connects the Pillow Book to the contemporary world, and it is the proposition that subjectivity is a legitimate literary subject. This sounds obvious now, and it is obvious now. And the reason it is obvious now is precisely because of the tradition that the Pillow Book helped to inaugurate. But in the literary culture of 10th century Japan, it was not obvious. The prestigious literary models were Chinese, grand, public, formal, concerned with state affairs and historical events and philosophical matters of universal significance. The writing of personal experience, the writing of preference and opinion and daily observation, the writing in the first person about one's own specific responses to specific things. This was not what literature was for. It was, in fact, gendered. Men wrote in Chinese, or in the formal Japanese modes derived from Chinese models. Women wrote in the vernacular Japanese kana, and in forms that were considered minor: poems, letters, diaries, pillow books. The forms were minor because the subjects were minor. The subjects were minor because women were minor. What Shonagon did, what she and Murasaki Shikibu and the other great women writers of the Heian period did, was take the minor form and fill it with something so substantial, so philosophically and aesthetically serious, that the question of whether it was minor became impossible to sustain. She wrote in kana, in vernacular Japanese, not in classical Chinese, and what she wrote in that kana was an argument that her particular first-person perspective on the world was worth recording, was worth preserving, was worth reading. This is a political act. The choice of language is a political act. It insists on the value of the vernacular, of the Japanese, of the female, against the prestige of the Chinese and the male and the official. The subject matter is a political act. It insists that the screen door and the dawn and the man who arrives too early are worth attending to. That daily experience is not too small for literature. That the texture of lived life deserves the same quality of attention that the official tradition gave to history and philosophy and the affairs of state. The political reading of the Pillow Book is this: it is a woman refusing to disappear. It is a woman in a system that provided her no formal mechanism of authority or permanence asserting, through the act of writing, and the act of writing this particular kind of thing, that she was here, that she mattered, that what she saw and thought and felt and preferred was worth keeping. The Fujiwara had the land and the political appointments and the imperial daughters and the regencies. Say Shōnagon had the notebook under the pillow. And the notebook is what survived. There are questions the book refuses to answer, and the refusals are part of the argument. Did she love anyone? The text suggests it, implies it, encodes it, never says it. Was she happy? The book performs happiness, performs confidence and delight in the world, but the performance is so relentless that you begin to wonder what it is covering. What did she actually think of the system that constrained her? The rank system, the marriage system, the political system that made her position so perpetually conditional. The book satirizes the system constantly, through its micro-judgments and its architectural contempt for people who fail the standards the system imposes, but it never argues against the system. It never proposes anything different. It takes the hierarchy for granted as the framework within which excellence can be achieved and evaluated. This is either a failure of imagination or a sophisticated recognition of what is possible, the difference between critique and the pragmatics of survival. I lean toward the latter, but the question remains. The comparisons that illuminate the Pillow Book from the outside are worth naming. Murasaki Shikibu's tale of Genji, written contemporaneously, is the obvious reference point. The two books are always discussed together, and there is in fact a real connection and a real rivalry. Murasaki and Shonagon were contemporaries in the same court world, on different political sides, and Murasaki's diary contains a pointed assessment of Shonagon, showing off too much, getting above herself. The criticism is, as I noted in the previous block, a classed criticism, Murasaki, of higher birth, criticizing Shonagon for performing above her station. But it is also a methodological criticism. Murasaki's instinct was to process experience into fiction, to transform the world into a long, deeply psychological novel about love and power and the passage of time. Shōnagon's instinct was to keep the texture of experience in place, to preserve the fragment rather than weave it into narrative. Both instincts produced masterpieces. The difference between them is a difference in philosophy about what literature is for. Kenkō's essays in Idleness, written in the 14th century, inherits Shōnagon's form and deepens its Buddhist resonances. The melancholy of impermanence, the pathos of beautiful things that pass, the investment in moments that cannot be held. Kenkō is more explicitly philosophical and more explicitly melancholy than Shonagon. She is sharper, funnier, less willing to dwell. The comparison is instructive about what she chose not to be. And Montaigne's essays, 3 centuries after Kenkō and 6 centuries after Shonagon, arrive at the same formal discovery through a completely different route, that the self, following its own thought, is a legitimate subject for serious writing. And the parallel illuminates something important about both writers, that the impulse to make the first-person singular into a literary form is not culturally specific. It is something that particular minds in particular moments discover, and the discovery changes literature each time it happens. Next, we move into the themes, the 5 analytical frames through which this series reads the book. I'll see you there. That's all for today on Libyth. If you want to follow the whole journey, subscribe, a new book every week.